Muscle is built through progressive overload. Now, many will argue the importance of volume, training to failure, mechanical tension, and all of these are pieces to the equation. But the bottom line is, if you could focus on one thing in the gym, and that is progression, you will get bigger, you will get stronger, and that progression will take care of every other variable that people waste time worrying about. But let's be a little bit more clear. What exactly is progressive overload? Simply put, that means creating a greater stimulus than your body is currently used to. And despite the fact that many people think this just means training harder, it's not necessarily about how hard you train, rather than doing something you've never done before. And there are multiple ways to accomplish this, but 5 in particular that I personally feel work best. The first is the most simple: add more weight to the bar. Now, that doesn't mean using more weight than you could handle. It means to strive to progressively lift more weight over time. If we're using the bench press as an example, and you're currently bench pressing 185 pounds for 10 reps, if you now focus on progressing to 205 pounds for 10 reps, using that same technique, and then eventually progressing to 225 pounds for 10 reps, all the way up to 315 pounds for 10 and beyond. Each step along the way, your chest is going to grow, and your pecs will be much larger when you're benching 315 pounds for 10 reps than they were when you were benching 225 pounds for 10 reps. Again, provided that your technique is standardized. Now, of course, volume, frequency, and intensity, they all play a role. But even if they were, let's say, suboptimal by the standards today, and you were able to progress so much in weight over time, you're still going to grow. And arguably, you're going to grow at a faster rate than any other method would allow. This is by far the most simple method to progressive overload, but that doesn't mean it should be the only option that you focus on. The second method is to perform more reps. Despite what you think, you can grow more muscle without ever lifting heavier weights, provided that you take the same weight that you're normally using and progressively add more repetitions to it. Let's say that you're barbell rowing 185 pounds for 10 reps. But any more weight than that, you just don't feel a good connection with the movement. You also know that you need to strive for progression to grow. You're currently able to do 10 reps with 185 pounds, but no more. If you keep that same load on the bar, but over the next few months, you slowly aim to add progression, going from 185 pounds to 10, to 185 pounds to 12, to 15, and even up to 20 repetitions. By the time you get to 185 pounds for 20 reps, guess what? Your back is going to be much more developed. Again, keeping those reps standardized, but now being able to perform an additional 10 repetitions with the same weight. That's going to require much more muscle and more strength, and your back is going to grow as a result. But now, let's say that more load and more reps are already a focus of yours. Are there any other methods to increase overload? Of course. Despite what many people like to argue online today, you can always add more sets to your training. And that is method number 3. But keep in mind, there's a huge caveat here. This does not mean that if you're currently performing 10 sets for a muscle group per week, that now if you go to 20 sets per week, or even 30 sets per week, that you will all of a sudden just grow more muscle. Keep in mind that we do have a limited amount of recovery, and we can't just add in endless amounts of sets forever. And of course, still expect to recover from that type of volume. So with that said, this is by far the hardest method of progressive overload to use productively, as if you're not careful, you can easily overdo it. But remember, performing more sets than you're currently used to will create a novel training stimulus. The key, however, is still training within your recovery ability. Despite what many people think, recovery is really not set in stone as far as a limited number of sets. It's not a case of, I grow best on 12 sets per week. So if I do 11, I'm not growing. And if I do 13, I'm overtraining. The reality is, if you have a body part that seems to do well on 12 sets, it's likely that you recover well and grow on a bit of a range of volume. That might be 10 sets all the way up to 15. And under 10 is just not a great stimulus for you to grow, and over 15 is just likely too much for you to recover from. But now, bumping sets from 12 up to 14, that still keeps you in your recovery range, but it's a novel training stimulus. This is just a very general example, and your individual recovery for body parts and the body as a whole, that can vary drastically from this. So don't use these numbers as a hard rule, but use it as a general example of how you can adjust volume for a greater stimulus. I worked with some guys who grow very well from as little as 6 weekly sets per muscle group, and I've had other guys that could easily hammer away 20 plus sets per body part per week. They can not only recover from that, but they also grow. Now, whatever that number is for you, just understand that it's generally a range and you should train within that range. But now, let's throw that all out the window for a second. Let's say that you're not going to add weight to the bar. You're not going to add repetitions. You're not going to increase sets. Can you still create progressive overload? Yes, you can. And the way to do that is number 4. Perform the same weight that you normally use, but with better technique. You might already be lifting very heavy, but if your technique can be improved, it makes no sense to strive to add more weight on the bar or do more repetitions. Let's say you're doing pull-ups with your body weight. You're swinging and you're barely getting your chin to the bar, but you're banging out 10 repetitions. Instead of now adding an additional 10 pounds to weighted pull-ups, perform them with the same weight, just your body weight. Slow down the reps, increase the range of motion, and get more out of the weight you're already using. This definitely applies to bodyweight movements, but any exercise in the gym as well. If you're doing dumbbell presses where your elbows barely break parallel, don't increase the load, increase the range of motion, and overload those muscles with the same weight. And the last technique, number 5, train a muscle or a lift more frequently. If you currently train a muscle group just once per week, switching it to at least twice per week will increase the frequency. In addition to that, it may also add to the total weekly volume. So this ties directly in with adding more sets. But increases in frequency itself, in some cases, that might be more beneficial than simply adding in more sets to just one session. The higher frequency of training also creates a more frequent stimulus. And for many people, keeping that same total weekly volume, but spreading it out over multiple sessions per week might actually work better than just once. If you're doing, let's say, 16 sets per biceps in 1 week, but you're doing it all in one single session, even cutting that down to 8 sets on Monday and then performing another 8 sets on Friday for the same 16 total weekly sets, but now with a more frequent stimulus and a higher quality of work, that almost always produces better results long term. But like volume, with this method, there's a point of diminishing returns and it must be balanced with your recovery. And if you're not doing any of these things in the gym currently, I highly recommend you implement them if you want to grow more muscle. And if you want to maximize your progress, I highly recommend that you implement all 5. But of course, make sure to balance them properly. Don't expect to continuously add weight to the bar and adding reps forever, but they should always be goals that you strive for. And if you want the exact programs that I personally recommend to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, all my old school mass gain programs are down below. And as always, if you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.